as always here at the Pick and Whistle Inn in Stormwind, I chat through a variety of subjects in respect to World of Warcraft. So grab a bottle or a pint, sit back and enjoy. Today's subject is all about dungeons. Now, this isn't going to be going through every single dungeon one by one, telling you what's the best about it, what's the worst. I would be sat here for years, honestly. There's so many dungeons within WoW, it's impossible to sort of go through even half of them within a few hours, to be honest, if you really want to get in depth about it. So the dungeons that I'm going to be looking sort of towards in this episode are sort of the best dungeons from my very first sort of memories. So when I first looked into doing dungeons from my very first character, which is my druid, as I've sort of touched on within the past. Now, to start it all off, the first ever dungeon that I did, like I said, was Sunken Temple. I touched on it a little bit, and this is where I sort of needed everything, and people were getting annoyed at me within the group, and I didn't even know what was happening. That's the first sort of memory, or that's the first dungeon I've ever been in, but that's not the first dungeons that I remember. They're two very different things. I've been told about the Sunken Temple dungeon, but the ones that I remember are all the Wrath of the Lich King dungeons. So all of the Wrath of the Lich King dungeons are Utgard Keep, Utgard Pinnacle, Nexus, the two Nerubian dungeons, Drak'Tharan Keep, Violet Hold. God help me with that dungeon, Jesus. Gundrak, Halls of Stone, Halls of Lightning, Oculus, again, an absolutely awful one, but we're not going to be touching on that today. We've got Culling of Stratholme, Trial of the Champions, and then you've got the three that I want to really delve into. You've got Forge of Souls, Pit of Sauron, and Halls of Reflection. These three I remember so well because I was still newish to the game. Patch 3.3 is when these dungeons were released. So if you're not familiar with World of Warcraft patches, you've got patch 3.0, which is the launch of the expansion, 3.1, which is the next raid, 3.2, which is the next raid, 3.3, which is the final raid of the expansion, and then you would go to 3.5 or 3.3.5, which is like a lead in to the next expansion, which will be put 4.0. So 3.3 is the very last raid with the expansion, and with this raid came these three dungeons. Now these three dungeons are well known as being some of the most difficult dungeons in the game when it's been released. There's a very few dungeons that have been released at mid expansion. They're all very much already out there for the players to sort of sink their teeth into as the expansion is released. But these three dungeons were insane. Firstly, we'll start off with the Forge of Souls. Two bosses. The last boss just is like a three-headed face, pretty much, and the only thing I can remember is it just screaming the entire time. Not screaming as in like a child screaming on a playground and like running about crying and he's hurt his like arm or something. I'm talking about like a screech almost, like in terms of speaking to you. Like everything he says is a screech, and it was just absolutely annoying as hell. But the only thing that I sort of remember wanting to do this dungeon for, there was a lot, it was a very linear, the dungeon. It was literally just, you were going across bridges and like literally thin bridges with all of these mobs. You're sort of working your way through the forge and stuff to the other end. It was quite good aesthetically. Like the backdrop looked amazing. You've got this massive roaring fire underneath you. And put this into sort of contrast, where the dungeons are is like a frozen tundra. Like it's in the zone Ice Crown. And I mean, the name's got ice in its name, so, you know, it's not necessarily going to be a place of, you know, sunshine grabbing a tan on the beach, is it? So it just looks amazing aesthetically. But the first boss was just a normal sort of humanoid, he threw a couple soul sort of abilities about, to kill a soul before it got to him and stuff. But he dropped a bag, and that's what I remember about him. He dropped a nice bag. Not too sure what slot it was. I'm pretty sure it was like 22 slot, but it was a bag nonetheless, and I want that bag. I think I still have it to this day, actually, which is really nice. But the first one was sort of a teaser. All of these 3 dungeons were linked. Now, all of these 3 dungeons were linked into the lore with the last raid as well. So as you were progressing, you were following your leader. So if it was Alliance, it was Jaina that you were following through this forge, trying to catch up to Arthas and save him. Arthas being the main antagonist for the expansion, the entire expansion. And if you were Horde, you would be going through with Sylvanas, again trying to catch up to Arthas to kill him, because of every sort of lore happened between them guys, between Arthas and Jaina and or Sylvanas. So it's quite fun, and it sort of it sets the scene for the next 2 dungeons, which are really sort of a step up, we'll say. There isn't much to say about this one. It is just a nice aesthetically looking dungeon, and a boss drops a bag. That's all I can say, really. So all of these 3 dungeons were linked. So when you get to the end of the first dungeon, Forge of Souls, there isn't a portal to exit. It's a portal into the next dungeon, which would be the Pit of Sauron. So the Pit of Sauron, now it opens quite cool, actually. So you jump through the portal, you walk forward a little bit, and then you have the 2 people that I mentioned, Jaina or Sylvanas, come through the portal with you and appear, and there's loads of guards with them. So there's a little bit of an RP event where there's a big Scourge Dragon. Rimfang is the name of the dragon, and you got the boss on top of the Rimfang just riding. So basically, there's a little bit of RP, there's a little bit of back and forth between these 2 characters. All of the guards are sent to charge in. They all get slaughtered, they get raised as undead, they charge back at you. So it's a nice fun start to the sort of dungeon. You're sort of thrown in it right away. So the Pit of Sauron, it's a giant crater, think of it as. So you've got this giant crater, and you've just got slaves everywhere mining away at this Saronite, which it's called in game, and you've even got literal skeletons mining the Saronite, because the Saronite is blood of an old god. This is going to get quite quite lore based here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right with most of it. But Saronite is the blood of an old god, and the old god is Yogg-Saron. So Yogg-Saron, old gods are these big bad manifestations of the void, pretty much. They're sent there to take over planets and corrupt a world soul. So Yogg-Saron is very powerful, to say the least. But just his blood turned the miners crazy. So what the Lich King does is he uses just skeletons, literal skeletons, with no flesh, no brain, no anything, to mine this Saronite, because even the blood of this old god makes it slaves crazy and go out of control pretty much. Even then, I think somewhere in lore it's the Saronite actually can drive the skeletons insane still somehow. I'm not too sure how that works, to be honest, but I'm pretty sure I remember hearing that. That could just be completely false and me making it up, but I'm gonna stick with it. So you're basically in this giant crater, and you're going around, you're freeing all of these prisoners, and you kill the first boss. Now the first boss is the one who works on the forges. It's a massive frost giant, but he works on the forges. So after you've killed him, all of the slaves that you've released run up the little ramp, towards where these forges are, and they start crafting their weapons. So you're sort of building up an army to push in. So you go to the next sort of boss, which is a little ghoul, this sort of abomination and this little gnome that's on top. And they're just dragging blocks around pretty much. The only thing I remember about these guys is that he has like an explosion and you just got to run away for a bit and then run back. That's about it. But that explosion really hurts, so don't underestimate that, by the way. But basically, you've sort of interrogated this gnome, like after you've killed his abomination that he sat on, and he's saying like what, and you sort of ask him where's this sword, which is called Frostmourne, like where is it being held? He gives you the answer and then he gets killed by Rimfang, the giant scourge dragon. So you've got your little army of like slaves, all armed now, and then so you're still in this crater and there's a path up for a cave to go up top towards this like tall spiky sort of building. That's the best way I can describe it. But basically you're working your way up this hill. You go through a cave, and this is the best part of the instance, in my opinion. As you're going through the cave, you're dragging these skeletons along with you, tanking them, killing them, whilst the cave is sort of collapsing. So as you're running through, you're trying to dodge the cave, like the cave ceiling collapsing. Otherwise, it will deal a lot of damage to you. Trust me, don't underestimate that. But you would be dodging and weaving whilst trying to kill these skeletons that are on your back, trying to tank it and everything. And then when you finally get to the end of this cave, you push out and like there's a little bit of RP moments and you've got your little like sort of army at your back, and then you have to fight the main boss as they're holding off like loads of skeletons coming up the tunnel behind you, which is quite cool actually. So you're fighting him, you're dodging the dragon's like breath constantly as well. In the end, you sort of prevail and stuff, and it's really cool. Then there's another RP moment where all of the people that you've saved and, you know, given hope and sort of weapons to, they push out and they sort of say, thank you, like we couldn't have done this without you. And then the mother of the like scourge dragons called Sindragosa sort of pops up. You're dragged back into the cave and like walled off. So, like, you're walled off safely, but everyone that you've just saved within that instance and that you've armed and everything gets, like, blasted and killed. So it's quite a sad sort of ending to the instance because even though you won, you technically lost as well, if that makes sense. So it's quite sort of, you feel like, I don't know, drained from that. It's like, oh, well, that all didn't necessarily matter, to be honest, but you've kind of got to push on and, you know, see it out. So again, you've just done 2 out of the 3 instances, and then it's time to go on to the final instance, which is called the Halls of Reflection. Now, this dungeon was nuts and absolutely overtuned to the extent that it was ridiculous. Overtuned being it was super tough and everything hit hard and like a brick, to be honest. So firstly, about the look of the like first room, it's a redesign of the Lordaeron throne room. So Lordaeron throne room is now the Undercity, is what Lordaeron is called. It's called the Undercity. But the throne room is where Arthas killed his dad in Warcraft 3, I believe it is. And it's basically where the throne of Lordaeron came tumbling down and like the entire sort of north like human population got absolutely like wiped out by the scourge and stuff. So basically Arthas has created this sort of darkened Lordaeron throne room to give him that sense. It is where he lived pretty much. So it's kind of a dark version of that. And the first 2 bosses, or you sort of walk in and you see what you've been looking for, which is Frostmourne, which is the sword that sort of, it kind of corrupts Arthas. Corrupts probably the best word that I can use. Persuades him, sort of leads him on, stuff like that. It basically is not good for him, that blade. And it sort of speaks to him and sort of whispers to him and stuff like that. but you sort of have a chat with a spirit within the blade. This is all like at the very start of the third dungeon, by the way, which is really cool. So it's really lore heavy, and it's from a guy called Uther, and Uther was the teacher of Arthur's, who he killed whilst trying to whilst Uther was going to bury Arthur's like dad's ashes and stuff. So it's really lore heavy. And then Arthas walks in and pretty much says, like, what are you doing here? Like, and then he calls out to his captains, who are the two bosses, Falric and Marwyn. I believe that's what they were called. But he calls them, they're obviously Death Knights, but these are the two first bosses. They're in this tiny ass, like, Lordaeron throne room look-alike. And then all of these soldiers, all of these like ghostly soldiers spawn around them, like around the outside of the room. And you have to fight waves of soldiers before you could fight the bosses. So there were 10 waves in total, but every 5 waves you would fight a boss. Now don't get me wrong, these waves were difficult. Like, the only strat that you could do was go into a corner to line of sight all of them, because some were ranged, some weren't. But you could line of sight all of them, and then it would just be, it would be a cluster. It would absolutely be chaos in that corner. You couldn't see anything if you were a melee. You were just seeing a wall next to some, like, short, stubby dwarf, like, ghost trying to attack you. Like, it was absolutely ridiculous and chaotic, but it was brilliant because of how tough and challenging it was. That was the best thing about it. So after you killed, like 5 waves, you kill the boss, kill the first boss, which is Falric, and then you survive another 5 waves, and you kill Marwyn. Now, these bosses were extremely tough, just saying. But whilst this was all happening, whoever you were with, Horde or Alliance, Jaina or Sylvanas, they would run off after Arthas, and they've been fighting him that entire time. So you're fighting your way down this, literally, it's just a long corridor. This dungeon is just a little room, a little circular room, a straight corridor, a right-hand turn, and then sort of a kind of an S-shaped, a very thin S-shape, like down the opposite side, back the way that you came. That's all this dungeon is, but it's so perfect. So you're running up this tiny hallway, you kill a couple big giant skeletons, that's it. And then you meet them fighting in the throne room. And again, there's more RP. They'll say, like, we can't fight him, we've got to make a run for it. Like, he's too strong. You literally, the last boss of this dungeon, and of these 3 dungeons, is called Escape from the Lich King. You don't kill a boss, you run away from a boss, which is something that they've never done before since, I believe. But that's why this dungeon is so sort of perfect, and why people look back on it so fondly, because it gives the final boss of an expansion that sort of real terrifying feeling, and sort of like, he is way too powerful, we gotta book it, otherwise we're done for. And that is true. Like, you're running away and he's like putting up these ice walls directly in front of you, these huge ice walls. You have to kill all of the undead that he throws at you, and then the ice wall will break, because whoever you're with, Jaina or Sylvanas, will break it. Now, at this point, he's still walking towards you very slowly with this like blizzard sort of aura around him. And basically, if you got caught in that, you were dead. There's no chance you're getting out of that. That thing dealt so much damage. Like, at the time of its release, it was unreal. You got caught in that, you're just gone. You're a goner. But he did this several times, and each time the mobs were getting tougher and tougher, so the undead were getting tougher that he threw at us. And every time he's just still walking towards you. You still got that sort of grain in the back of your mind, like, okay, he's getting super close. We got to kill this quick. We got to kill this one quick. We got to kill this quick. He's getting close. All right, we've got about 5 seconds before he reaches. Okay, run, book it now. And if you had a good group, you could notice that he's getting further and further back each time you killed the mobs, because he's not catching up to the distance that you run before the next wall. But if you had a bad group, he's catching up a tiny bit each time until you're at the final wall and he's hit you pretty much with that blizzard, and you're right up against this wall, can't go anywhere and can't move anywhere. So it's that real time gated sort of like feel. I'm pretty sure there was an achievement to escape him in under 6 minutes. I'm pretty sure that was the achievement. I'm pretty sure it was called I'm not running away, I'm just simply going in the opposite direction. I'm pretty sure it's something along them lines, that achievement. I remember getting it. It was actually quite fun. But again, just that entire boss fight is you not fighting a boss. You're running away from the boss whilst he's throwing stuff at you. So you're kind of the boss for him, because if he can slow you down enough, then he catches you and kills you. It's kind of like his mechanic. It's like, if you can play this well, and you can summon the right things to slow them down enough and catch them up, you've won this boss fight for him. It's not the other way around. It's sort of flipped in that regard. I'm not too sure if that makes sense. Does in my head, but, you know. But even after all of this, you've got through all of the ice walls, it's a dead end, and you just have to turn around and fight. And he gets to the top of the cave, or this like long sort of stretch, and he starts just basically choking the life out of whoever you're with, whether it was Jaina or Sylvanas, and you're powerless pretty much. You can't do anything until your sort of gunship that's flying around Icecrown throughout the entire expansion just pulls up and shoots the cave down on top of him. And that is kind of where it ends. Them three dungeons are probably the best dungeons in the entirety of WoW. That might be a big statement. I might think of some others that are actually a lot better, to be honest. But they're the best combined dungeons within the game, lore-wise. They were so rich with lore, just the aesthetic, the reason why they were there, what you did within the dungeons. They were so pleasing to complete, plus the loot's always a bonus, but they were so pleasing to complete because it was such a challenge, especially the Halls of Reflection, that it didn't matter if you wiped several times. It didn't matter if you did it the first time. You get that same sense of completion like every time that you finish the dungeon. But these are certainly up there with one of the greatest sort of dungeons like that I've ever done. These three dungeons I will always remember playing through on my druid. I remember the exact corner that I sat in, like to drag the waves of enemies towards me. I remember the exact mobs that are in that dungeon. I know that there's a Lordaeron like marksman, Lordaeron sorceress, Lordaeron warrior. There's always one more. There's a rogue, I believe. There might have been a paladin, but I'm not too sure. But there were two massive constructs, like two bone, like skeleton constructs in that long hallway before you reach Arthas and whoever he's fighting. And then he summons just, you know, typical ghouls, abominations, and the sort of the lanky undead one. I'm not too sure what that's called. A Geist he also summons. But it was so iconic because all of these three dungeons were linked. Whereas he's like, WoW have never done this before. Blizzard have never done that before. And they have not done it since, I believe. Not off the top of my head anyway. Don't get me wrong. Not off the top of my head. Like going from one dungeon to another dungeon to the next dungeon. And the thing is, with these dungeons, you can do like the other dungeons. So you couldn't do the second and third dungeon if you hadn't already done the first dungeon. So you can do Halls of Reflection, which is the third dungeon, if you hadn't already done Forge of Souls and Pit of Sauron, because it was so lore-based and you were going through these like dungeons with this character that you had to complete the full sort of lore and story behind these dungeons before you could just freely go, yeah, I want to do that dungeon, or I want to do that dungeon, stuff like that. So it was really cool the way that they like done all of these dungeons, molded them all together, put them all in back to back and stuff. And the lore behind it is just great. I didn't appreciate the lore behind it at the start because I was very new to WoW still, but obviously over the years of playing WoW, I have become very sort of, I've learned a lot of lore, and the lore really does intrigue me. And looking back on them dungeons, they did them perfectly, to be honest. They did them perfectly, and I wouldn't have them dungeons any other way in my memory, because I will always remember them. But this will be a little bit of a short one today. I was sort of, testing the waters with dungeons, seeing how many sort of dungeons I could talk about and stuff, in half hour. 3's good, but might be a bit more, might be a 4th one in there next time, stuff like that. But I had to start with these 3 because they are so iconic, and because they are just perfect, for me to start, because that is where my memory starts with dungeons, which is the great part. But thank you all very much for watching, as always. And I do have to say that I hope you find all of this interesting and enjoyable. My aim is to continue to do this for you, and building on subject matters and content, such as what I said in the past, like a WoW weekly, WoW monthly sort of stuff, that sort of content. I do have a lot of plans going forward. Part of that is growing a community as well. I do have a Pig and Whistle Discord up now. It is in the description, by the way. And it is basically a community of like-minded people that I want to get as much out of these casts as they want to as well. It's always tough asking for support, but just as your guild needs your help and support, I wanted to let you know about how you can help and support Pig and Whistle podcast as a whole. First of all, let's be clear, Pig and Whistle Tales will always be available free of charge for your enjoyment. That won't ever change, believe that. But for those of you who want to support Pig and Whistle and help it grow even more, then you certainly can. For just £5 a month, about the same price as a flagon of ale, if you're listening to one of these stories, or a couple of finely crafted pies from the Pig and Whistle bar, you can subscribe to the Pig and Whistle Patreon. Again, this is down in the description, and I'd really appreciate you guys clicking that link. And as a thank you, you will receive a number of additional benefits, including podcasts reserved for Patreon members only that contain exclusive content. Plus you will also have certain privileges within the Pig and Whistle Discord and be able to ask questions and provide ideas for future episodes. If you want to take a look at the Patreon page, find it down below, or find it on www.patreon.com/pig and whistle. That's pig and the word, that's pig, the word and then whistle. Patreon.com/pig and whistle. All the information you need is there for you to look at. And remember, you can cancel any time that you want. It's just, it would be a great deal for me to sort of get that support and know that I'm being backed on these sort of podcasts, and it will really help me push it forward and see how far we can go with this. Thank you again as always for listening, guys. It is very appreciated, and go with Valor, friend.